Thank you for joining us tonight for what I promise will be the best conversation taking place on immigration policy in the country this year. This debate is motivated by our core belief that a stronger Canada is one that provides opportunities and economic well-being to all Canadians, those born here and those we hope to attract here, now and into the future. And so on topics like immigration, we have to get it right. Canada needs no less, Canada deserves no less.
Our system is under a lot of pressure. It's under a lot of stress. So much so that it has become visible to all of us. So I'm arguing not against immigration. I want that to be clear. But I'm arguing for the supports that immigrants need to be successful in this country. How do we welcome those newcomers, but at the same time ensure that they can be successful and have the supports that they need to be their best selves? And that's why I am arguing for the motion that our levels are too high for the well-being of newcomers and our economy overall. Thank you.
The first thing we have to do is a much better job at immigrant settlement. Secondly, I would make the argument that we have been a failure as a country. The fact is that we have done a poor job of putting the education of the people coming to this country to work. We've done a poor job, or relatively poor job compared to the way we used to do it, of integrating those people into the country and into the economy. It certainly can't be about setting numbers. It has to be about us making a better effort to integrate the people who come to this country than we're doing today.
We are receiving over 1 million newcomers, and almost all of the temporary foreign workers and almost all of the students now have work permits. They're entering the labor force. They need housing. They need access to health care, even if they're paying for it themselves. They all constitute additional pressure on scarce social services, particularly housing. We would in fact have to triple to quadruple immigration levels from where they are now to like 4 to 5% of population, millions of people a year, in order just to maintain the average age ratio in the population. It can be helpful, it can be mitigating, but it is not the solution. Economically, I haven't even addressed how people can't find doctors, the huge infrastructure deficits. We can't keep up with the infrastructure now. What if we add another 5 million people, 10 million people in the next 5 years? How do we possibly do this? It is a question of practicality and of numbers. On the economy, yes, John, immigration helps to grow GDP. But in many jurisdictions, particularly for lower skilled workers, it reduces per capita GDP, and Canada is on a precipitous decline.
It's not, are we doing a good job with immigrants? It's not, could we do a better job? It's, are the numbers the right numbers? And are they the right numbers for immigrant populations themselves? Are they the right numbers for society as a whole? Here's the thing. Thanks to us putting our heads in the sand on issues like productivity, on issues like how we're going to build our economy more, through generations of governments of every political stripe, we now have no other choice. So John said the other choices have lots of babies. He's not wrong. There's actually 4 options for us today in Canada. Option number 1, have a lot more babies. Option number 2, ask people to work well into their 70s as a regular function of how the work life works. Option number 3, get a lot poorer. Decline our GDP perhaps by 2% per year, according to the Century Initiative, versus what it could be. Option number 4, a lot more immigration. So unless you believe we're going to have lots more babies, unless you believe that it is politically and morally correct to ask people to work well into their senior years, unless you're okay with the country becoming much poorer and much less influential, our only option is to increase immigration. And they get here and they die on the streets of Peel Region because there is no one there for them. There is no dad to carry them over the snowbank. That is a disgrace. That is inhuman. That is shameful. But we can't blame the problem on the victims of the problem. We can't blame the problem of housing on the immigrants taking up the housing. We need everyone to be able to be productive members of our community. So therefore, yes, we need the big numbers. Yes, the proposition is wrong. But we also have to do a hell of a lot of better job on restructuring everything we do to make sure that every single person that comes here gets to live a life of dignity and a life to their full potential.
So the affirmative side of this debate is recognizing that while we all support immigration, it's the rate of entry that is the challenge. Close to 2 million people arriving in this country in a year is causing a lot of pressure on our systems. That's 1.5 minutes. Someone is arriving to this country. 1.5.
The gap between those who are comfortable and those who are struggling is going to increase, and that poses the greatest threat to the social consensus that we've had in this country. And that is why we need to have the people come, as Naheed said so well, because the other choices don't seem to be the viable ones, and that they are going to be here to build the economy, to build prosperity, to help us to create wealth so that we can maintain the quality of life, and so that they can enrich the country as they've done in previous generations.
It's even more immoral and unethical to invite newcomers here to face homelessness. We have refugees sleeping on the streets. John, congratulations on whatever modular housing you built, but it wasn't enough. We need to triple housing levels to pretend that we can solve the housing crisis without addressing the demand side. I submit is at best wishful thinking.
So Jason is making a math error that I need to point out to you. In talking about GDP per capita staying stagnant in Canada, he's absolutely right. However, it's not just because the denominator is growing. It's not just because population is growing. It's also because GDP is stagnant. And if you want GDP overall to remain stagnant, as John said, it's grown by 1.5% instead of a traditional 3%. If you want it to stay stagnant or decline, have fewer people. So your GDP per capita will still go down if your GDP is not increasing. And what we know, as Dr. Robson has well put out, immigration is not the full solution, but it's an important part of it. Of course we need productivity increases. Of course we need more capital formation in the economy.
First of all, as I pointed out, the research is clear, and this is primarily work that Bill and others have done at the Institute, that immigration does not fundamentally change the age structure of Canada's population. And I refer you to their papers, but essentially you would require tripling to a quadrupling of immigration levels to maintain the current age dependency ratio between seniors and workers. And that's just implausible in my judgment. So we have to find other tools. And that includes investing more in helping older people to expand their lifetime in the workforce.
Yes, it's correct. We're doing very poorly. Is that the fault of immigration, or is that the fault of the fact we haven't created enough value-added jobs through our policies as government and even decisions made by the private sector to make the investments, to keep up with the innovation, to improve our productivity? Look at our productivity performance compared to people around the world. Why is that? Why would that be in this, one of the smartest, richest countries in the world, that we would have that kind of low productivity? And so the solution isn't to say, well, somehow by cutting off immigration, those numbers on GDP per hour worked are going to come up. The solution is to have more value-added jobs. So I just don't think, again, the answer is to sort of cut back on the numbers of people we need to preserve our quality of life and to build our country going forward.
Now, I think the fundamental solution to the challenges of social integration are good economic integration. But if we end up, like where we see in Europe, we broadly accept immigration has been a failure in many of those countries. In populations that have been locked out of their societies, in many ways stuck in poverty and huge public housing projects with very little economic or social mobility, we do not want to recreate that in Canada. And right now, where we have basically zero vacancy available in rental housing, overheated housing market. Like, where are these young people going to live? 60% of the foreign students coming here are young men. As I said, many of them are sleeping shifts in their apartments. You keep the volume going on.
This question is posed is deeply problematic because underlying the question is the thought that Canada's foreign policy belongs to only the Canadians who are already here or the Canadians who've been here for a while. And that if newcomers come and have us shift our thinking in foreign policy, never mind that they're Canadian, and you all know what I'm referring to, what we're dealing with right now, that somehow that's un-Canadian, that that's not representative of the Canadian population.
So the answer is no. Our targets are not too high when it comes to our permanent residents. So 500,000, it's an ambitious target. It's okay. The challenge comes in the other categories that we don't really talk about. Who's really counting until at the end of the year when we have 900,000 students who have come here as international students, or 600,000 temporary foreign workers? Because each and every one of those people who arrive here are going to expect the same level of support in terms of a roof over their head, food on their table.
We have to be clear-eyed about this situation. The temporary foreign worker program, built under the previous government, continued in this government, is a disgrace. The person who serves you coffee at Tim Hortons in the morning deserves a dignified life. Simple as that. And it was exactly the right thing to do to offer temporary foreign workers a pathway to citizenship. The unintended consequence, however, has become that has become a backdoor way to get into the permanent resident stream. So if I'm sick of waiting for you to recognize my qualifications, I can come in as a TFW, do my time at Tim Hortons or as a personal support worker, and make my way into. That's a rational decision that human beings are making. We have no credible political party in Canada that is taking an anti-immigration stance. That's a big deal. But it's a big deal precisely because even though we see social acceptance of immigration levels starting to decline in ways we haven't seen in a long time, even though there may be some political gain in taking an anti-immigration stance, the political parties, the credible political parties, will not go there. Let me tell you what scares me. What scares me is that regardless of what level of immigrants we bring into this country, if we don't fundamentally change how we do language training, if we don't fundamentally change, and Jason Kenney, by the way, is a hero for what he's done in this area, if we don't fundamentally change the accreditation of foreign skilled professionals into the community so people can work in the area they've dreamed to work in, and if we don't encourage everyone who comes to this country to learn about people different than them, if the schools are not full of kids from different backgrounds, then we're running a very real risk. And yes, we need to accredit people in their professions the minute they get here. But if we can do all of those things, then the levels of immigration that we're looking at today are precisely the ones we need to make sure that we have a prosperous and dignified country far into the future.
The economic data is clear. Poverty is growing amongst newcomers to Canada. Why in the world, and how can we possibly think that it is moral to invite more people here at a time such as this to face homelessness and a greater chance of poverty, not to mention the challenges of getting to work at their skill level? I don't think it is. I think we need to be practical, soft-hearted but hard-headed about this, as Canadians typically are. I would also point out that neither of my esteemed colleagues on the negative side have addressed two big issues I raised. It's just like we allied past these things in our immigration debate. What do the Indigenous people of Canada think about adding 1 to 2 million people a year to their traditional territories. I believe that we can struggle our way to find a balanced solution that I believe would result in a reduction in the intake of students, temporary foreign workers, and perhaps some categories of permanent residents, all with the goal of improving the opportunities and outcomes for newcomers and all Canadians. We're up to the task.
At the end of the day, I believe as a free enterpriser and just as somebody who's been in public life but also in private life, if we are not creating wealth in this country, then there will be nothing, for us to redistribute in the cause of investing in education, investing in housing, investing in healthcare, investing in looking after seniors. And that is why I believe, yes, we can do a better job of settling immigrants. The best way to bring up the GDP per hour worked is by having people in better jobs, and that includes people who live here, and it includes people who are going to come here. And if we don't do that, we will not be able to finance the quality of life that we come to accept in this country. We will not be able to look after older people. A final comment. I think the greatest threat that should cause us to stay up at night, beyond the fact that our quality of life is slipping and will continue to slip if we don't do anything about it, it's not immigration, it's a coming apart of the social contract and the social consensus we've had with one another, because we really did believe there was a Canadian dream that said everybody could be anything that they wanted to be, through education and through hard work and through opportunity that came from innovation and investment, made not by government, some of the times with some help from government, with non-high tax, non-obstructionist policies.
The conversation that we're having is about Canada's future. It's about the future that we want. And I believe that that's a future we must create. It's one that we have to build. And we have to invest in it. And we have to do big, bold, and sometimes difficult and challenging things. Because the reality is, in the time that it has taken us to have this conversation and to have this debate, around 162 people have continued to arrive. Where are they going to live? How are they going to feed themselves and their families? How are they going to get around? Where do they go when they need that medical support? And I believe that our priorities and our policies must be aligned. And so, I'll give you the big number that is needed to meet that affordable housing supply. $1 trillion. That's what's needed by 2030 to close the gap. So on the affirmative side, we are not saying no. We're saying, let's be realistic with how much until we can get it right.
Please join me, everyone, in thanking Regent for supporting this debate. To our jury members who are now getting themselves immortalized in a picture. And one more time to our debaters, Mitzie Hunter, Jason Kenney, John Tory, Naheed Nenshi. That was a heck of a debate.